Your time. First and foremost, let me welcome you to Cisco. And I'm sure you'll find this presentation very exciting. We are working with AEM for last 3 years. We started with version 5.6. Right now we are on version 6.0, and hopefully next year we'll go to version 6.3. Right? And what the way we have implemented AEM in Cisco is what we call as multi-tenant platform, which means that the single platform which supports multiple tenants. So Cisco.com, CEC, supply chain.cisco.com, live connections. We have about 11 tenants that we support on AEM. Besides all these tenants on Cisco.com, we also have 89 country sites. And that is where the globalization comes in. And this was a huge project for us. Took us about a year. First to deliver the project, at the same time then migrate the websites onto AEM, right? And these two gentlemen, Eldho Syriac, who's our senior architect, and Shakeela, our senior analyst, they were instrumental in delivering this project. So without further delay, I would like to welcome Eldho and Shakeela to share their vision about globalization.
Thanks, Mukund. That was a good introduction. And good evening, everyone. I'm Shakeela Yazadi. As Mukund mentioned, I'm the Senior Solution Analyst. And today I'll be covering the business objectives and what are the key drivers for us to go into globalization. Why globalization? Has anyone thought about it? The word globalization is all around us, and people are viewing that as an opportunity. As the world is getting more and more interconnected, if you take anything in the current world, right from the products to social, it's not limited to the national level. So in this day and age, for any company to run its business, they need to have a global identity, and also ensure that they are following the global local government regulations. The key is to generate revenue by having a global presence. What it all drills down to: distribution of information worldwide at a real time, and also meeting the growing demand of the localized content, the word localized content. So keeping all this in mind, that's what we are here, and we're going to talk about globalization. Let me actually show you what is the Cisco.com landscape. Cisco is a global company, and as you can see, this is not a small site, it's a humongous site. And already, as Mukund mentioned, we have launched 90 plus local home pages to support our products and services, and 56 marketing sites, somewhere between 25 to 4,000 pages per sites we have currently. And also this platform, we have empowered the platform to launch the global brand campaign, hosting multiple sites, which Mukund mentioned about multi-tenant, which means that you're hosting, like the people deal via Cisco, Never Better Time Tomorrow, including our intranet CEC, and we have the Sales Connect, which is a desktop application, live connection, all that we have. And also you can create the subdomain so that we can avoid hosting any platform outside a Cisco firewall. And all this could happen because we have the end-to-end solution, and globalization is one of the key keys to have that, right? And the people who come and visit our site, right from guests, partners, customers, and also our employees, each visit is an opportunity either for marketing, sales, support, and engage our employees as well. I do want to call out our key stakeholders who have made this site up and they're maintaining it. One of us is in the audience, the marketing stakeholder, and we have support, and we have technical documentation. So this is an overview of our front door entry to Cisco.com page. Okay. With that, before I go and show what is our current one, I just want to flash what is the past Cisco.com landscape. We had an outdated technology, which was 10 plus years old, with multiple applications, 1.x, 2.x, web publisher, everything. If an author had to content a regular content, he had to be in one site area. And the same content, if it has to be on the Globalized, they have to go to the various sites. And imagine if we have to launch a global brand campaign. And it wasn't an easy task. A lot of planning was needed. It's just not in time, even the effort. And not to forget the biggest one, the cost that will get involved. So looking at the number of pages that you saw, and looking at this complexity of we were not globally strategic ready, keeping all this in mind, it was not feasible to continue in this particular with the old technology. That's the reason we had to move to our next phase, and we wanted to make sure that we are global ready with the newer technology. As Mukund mentioned, we have a platform environment as both authoring as well as publishing, and we are in AEM 6.0. With that, we met our key stakeholders, as I mentioned. They were saying that what are the critical business needs? We have been working on globalization for a month and a half. I know we cannot do a justification by putting everything, so we have only captured the key ones. I'm going to talk about the very first one. The local sites in alignment with the English site. Yeah, as I said, if you have to be a global company, we need to ensure that the information is distributed worldwide at a real time, and this is the first statement we have. And the second statement, if you see, the second request that a business needed was content should be replicated automatically to local country sites. The word I'm going to emphasize here is automatically, which means this came from our support stakeholder. Due to various constraints, they said we'll only create and update pages in the EN-US site, English site, and we want to ensure that it gets replicated in all our local sites once the translation gets completed, and also auto-publish, which means everything is done by the system. Only for EN-US, they'll be making the changes. If you take an English sites, if they're going to create a page, that's it. They create a page, and the triggering criteria is they will be publishing it to the end users. Once they publish to the end user, the system should take care of all the mechanism of translating the content, copying it in the local site, and it's auto-publishing. And the same synergy will happen if they're updating an existing published site. And the triggering criteria is once they publish the most updated content, it has to trickle down to the local sites. And the third scenario is someone is deactivating or deleting a site. What happens is we cannot have an EN-US site, the page is deleted and the local is still up and running. That will give a disjoint experience. So if any site gets deactivated or deleted, automatically the localized site should be disabled. So this is called the automated process. And the next one we're going to talk about is the manual replication. This came from our marketing stakeholder. Basically over here, we'll be doing this similar activity, but everything will be done manual because of the control launch they have. What do they do is, once again, they create a page, moving page from English site to the local sites will be done by an author, by a user, will not be done by system. Including the translation also is triggered manually. The workflow, everything will go through the manual process. And publishing also will be done manually. And all the features that we have built, automatic or manual, tomorrow, I'm just taking a stakeholder name. It doesn't mean that if it's a support stakeholder, they're only consigned to automatic and marketing manual. Tomorrow, if any of the stakeholders plan to change the way of launching the pages, they can change, they can switch to any direction. And integration with existing translation services. We already have an in-house translation service. For automated translation, we have Mission Translation, and we have the Cisco Manage Human Translation and Cisco Manage Machine Translation. We want to integrate with the existing translation system so that our stakeholders' needs are met. And the fifth bullet point is support global permission. As you have seen, the number of permutation and combination with a number of stakeholders, we wanted to ensure that the permission model was in place, give permission for an author to author the content within their region and restrict their access if it's outside the area. So we had to maintain that because that is a key, and we don't want, especially when you're authoring a content or publishing a content, permission is a key to maintain. And automated reports. This automated reports is, ask for the automated report is, our content owner needed to ensure that they're able to audit and they're able to manage the global website. As you saw the volumes in the previous, the Cisco.com volume, and you're seeing the permutation and combination. As the content is moving from English to the local sites, it goes through a life cycle process. Believe me, Eldho will explain more detail. It goes to the translation, it goes to translation process, get the translation getting completed, the content is getting copied to the local site, and it's getting published. During any of this cycle, if any error comes, we need to capture this as part of a report. So the content owner gets this report and they can take the necessary action and maintain the website, the global websites. The second last is search engine optimization. As we all know, we have built the system, right? Search engine is a key. We need to ensure that the search results is at the top of, it has a ranking that it can come to the top for any search results that you're doing for a content. The last one is the operational efficiency. Whatever we are doing right now, we have to make a simplified experience, right from an author to a publisher to a content owner, even to an end user, to our customer. We can keep them engaged. We can increase the visitation into the pages, everything. So we want to make sure that we are operational efficient in doing enabling all these features. Any questions before I move on to the next slide? Okay. I want to quickly flash the simplified experience between our past experience and the current experience. As I said in the past, we had too many sites, platforms, and duplicate contents being created in site 1, site 2, site 3. And time to market was challenging, and we were not globally strategically ready. So I don't want to beat on my past, but I'll talk more on the current. We are a multi-tenant. As I said, we have an end-to-end solution, including globalization. We are multi-tenant, and it's easy to manage our global websites, the use of content, and we have structured content, branding, like especially if we have to launch a global brand campaign, is simple and fast. And same thing we are talking about. And right now in the current model we have is we are able to host, manage, and translate. And the key highlights I want to call out is we have a content reuse, we have a translation mechanism, privilege for regional content authoring, and globalization was one of the key features for us to migrate our content from the legacy platform into the current Cisco.com platform. If you look at a lot of business benefits, I know I did talk to our stakeholders, there's increase in our customer engagement, and we are global ready. Real time, we are maintaining our content as well as managing our content. And I think we have optimized authoring and publishing at the same instance. So having all this, it was a good experience on having a globalization. And the increase, correct me Chris, I think we took a recent study of there's an increase of around 20% in the increase in global visitation, visiting the sites, as well as the author that were increased in our site has been increased by around, I'd say, 20% and plus so far. Any questions before I hand it over to Eldho? Yes, please.
How many stakeholders would you say you have? You
Stake-
talk about support stakeholders or marketing stakeholders.
Yes.
How many people do you engage with for content requests or design requests and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, actually we engage with, right now we engage with 4 major stakeholders. One is our marketing, second is our support, third is our technical documentation, the writer, and the fourth one is our intranet sites, they are there. And these 4 stakeholders are our gatekeepers, because even for the multi-tenant architecture, they come through them. And for us, from an IT perspective, these are our 4 key stakeholders, they come. And we have one more stakeholders who is like the catch-all bucket. They do the digital check-in when they wanted a multi-site.
Mhm.
So these are the 5 key stakeholders we have currently in our
Okay.
system.
If you're talking about, if you're asking how many authors you have in the system,
Not necessarily
Stakeholders.
others, more requesters.
Yeah.
I want this, I
so
want that.
those 4 major groups,
Yeah.
but within those groups, I would say close to 4,000 plus authors on the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
That actually, that's good.
Yeah, so you have a question?
Yeah, I think that was my question. So
Oh.
how big of a content authoring team,
Right.
the approval, dual step and whatnot, what size of the team you have in place for
Okay.
a site visit of this size? It's about 4,000.
But
And because it's multi-tenant, it's spread. We have CEC, which is our internal website. So you have HR, finance, publishing onto that website, right? Or the corporate communications publishing on that side. If you talk about salesconnect.cisco.com, which is also a tenant on the same platform, we're talking about the sales operations publishing content to that. And then Cisco.com, she talked about the stakeholders. So because we have multi-tenancy architecture, there is almost, I would say, entire Cisco is at some point
So
of
it's
time.
not like a centralized offering team?
No, it's not.
It's
And
not.
it's a self-service kind of model. So IT is nowhere in the publishing or content creation business.
Got it.
Yeah.
Just one follow-up question. What was the driver behind moving to AEM?
What was the driver? I know.
Sorry, if I missed it.
No. It's
So for picking the AEM,
Yeah, driver.
so we were actually on the publisher that will be the EMC document in the publisher, right? It was actually going out of business. We have to pick a content management system. And then we were evaluating, we actually found day software that was actually a CQ at that time, because it was default. And we found the feature, we picked AEM, the CQ as our solution. And then we found the capability of CQ to extend it to a web stack, right? CQ is traditionally, it's an authoring platform, but they have the capability to render the content using the same replication mechanism. So we use CQ or AEM for both author and publishing.
So that was the key thing. We wanted a end-to-end platform. From content creation all the way to content publishing and actual live website, right? We wanted to be on a single platform, and Dale was the only one. Adobe bought Dale later on. When we started, it was CQ5,
Yeah.
right? So that was one of the criteria, right? We have one single platform which provides end-to-end experience.
Okay.
So just to extend this question, I think what I would like to ask is, why CQ5? I mean, why Adobe? You have a site code, you have a lot of other CMs which provide almost the same thing, right? This is a very broad question, I
Sure,
understand. There are a lot of functionality which is provided by site code as well, and they do it first.
Sure, but the thing is, one of the things which, at that time it was not Adobe, but staying with Adobe AEM is, we use a lot of Adobe products on the marketing side. Western target, side. So the integrations become easier.
Absolutely.
And dealing with one single vendor, instead of dealing with 5-6 different vendors and integrating them, it makes sense to go with one single vendor which provides end-to-end capability.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We are also using Target and Analytics and Content Manager. I'm sure Cisco is using it. So
Yeah.
that kinds of helps out in the other things. So good to know.
Actually, I have one question on your, so when you do local content and it publishes automatically to the global sites, as well as the kind of translation processes, are those out of the box AEM functionality, or how do you guys accomplish that?
Yeah, I know Eldho is going to cover that in detail.
I'll-
Yeah, he'll cover it in detail, yeah, so. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to Eldho.
Okay. Okay, thank you for coming, taking time off this evening and joining this presentation, and thanks Amit for giving the opportunity to present in this forum. So before I go into the next slide, I want to actually put a few disclaimers. One is like when we started Globalization, we started on AEM 5.5. So some of the features available on that product. Right? So the capabilities that we built based on what is available on the product. So I know that you guys must be working on the latest version of the AEM, and you will see some of the features that we implemented is already available as part of the product. So just want to kind of let you know. And by the way, my name is Eldho Syriac. I think Mukund already introduced. I was leading the Globalization Strategy and Architecture for Cisco.com, and I'm based out of Boston. I'm not anymore a Bay Area person. So before going into the globalization features, I want to actually flash you the Cisco.com architecture. I know we are not talking about the existing Cisco.com architecture as such, but I just want to give you a glimpse of what is our architecture, right? So I just want you to focus on the right side, like there's a line if you want to focus on the right side. That's our that's basically our web stack, which is facing the Cisco.com visitors. They're like dual data center architecture. We have AEM instance, like if you see the AEM publish, like we have around 4 instances of AEM publish on both the data center and the Apache dispatcher, which is again 4 or 5 instances which sitting in front of each of the AEM publish. And on top, like we have the CDN, which is Akamai, serving or caching the content for our end users. And now you shift your focus onto the left side, you can see the AEM author instance. That's where all our content authors come and create the content, and that sits on our internal network. We have all the network restrictions or topologies in place. And the AEM author has an integration with the 2 translation systems Shakeela has mentioned, and also we integrate with a rendition system, which is for generate or transforming your content. And there are all other integrations, but for our, I don't want to kind of mix up everything, but then this is for just the basic representation. Any question or I can, yeah.
One question. How many publishing instances do you have in each data center?
We have 4 of them.
4 publishing and 4 web servers?
We have 4 published instances, and I believe 5, we kind of added one more, so it's 5.
So you do load balance between
Yes.
data centers?
Yes.
Or do you
So we have, it's actually, we have, our setup is that our Apache will talk to the publish of the same data center.
okay.
But in case, if the publish goes down or the publish goes down, we have a mechanism
So it's a failover strategy.
Yes, we have. And we have also a DR, which
Oh.
actually comes in. This is an active mode.
Active.
So we have a DR, if both of them are actually down, the DR will come in.
How about the author? SLS
Author, we have
instance?
only 1 instance.
1 instance. So no MongoDB involved.
No.
It's a file system.
Cool.
So yeah, I guess in terms of the author scaling, I'm just kind of getting a sense. So if you have multi-tenants and they all share the single instance, so if you said 4,000 users, that's kind of
We have a problem.
yeah.
Yeah, we are actually working on a solution on that. I think maybe we can have a next session to talk about it.
All right.
But we have actually solving it. That's a problem. I think I'll talk about the problem when we started with globalization. I'm going to cover that. So when we started in 2014, about building the globalization or how we want to actually build the capability, right? So first thing that we need to, is everyone has to make this choice, right? Everyone has to go through this decision-making process. First thing is like, how is your country-side content, right? Do you want to actually replicate all your EN/US content to individual all the country sites, or you want to do a selective pages, right? So some of the things that we actually consider, we basically work with business, and from a business perspective, it's very difficult for them to replicate the content, because there's a lot of operational cost involved for managing the content, right? And the other thing is like, if you are to actually replicate the content, it needs to go through a translation process, and there is a translation cost involved. So business was not very keen on replicating everything into the countryside. And from an IT perspective, purely from an operation, having the single author, we always had a problem. Even with EN/US, running the 750K pages on EN/US site alone, we used to have a lot of author performance issues. So we don't want to, just because of that reason, we don't want to kind of replicate 750K pages into 90 sites, right? That would be a nightmare for us or for our operations team. So that was our first decision. We basically made a decision to go with the selective pages. And then second comes the domain. Like, do you want to have a single domain, like www.cisco.com, or do you want to have a country-specific domain for each country, like cisco.ca or cisco.in, because of the first choice, this was an easy choice. Since we are doing only selective pages, we won't be able to do a country-specific domain, and the reason for that is when we create content, the authors will actually put a relative links on the pages, right? If you have a relative links, and then if you come up with a country-specific domain, it will not be able to fall back to the country. That will be a difficult. We'll have to make a lot of adjustment, or we'll have to make a lot of additions to support that. So we decided to go with single domain, which is www.cisco.com, and each country will be separated by default path. Then comes the content structure. All our Cisco.com, the primary content generation happens on EN/US side, and from a business perspective, when they distribute this content into global countries, they want to kind of create an international site so that they can make changes to the content for the international countries. So we have the site structure is like EN/US to EN/INTL, and then to the country side. For any of the locale, if there's a locale that is used in multiple countries, let's take an example, Spanish, right? Spanish is in Spain Spanish and Latin American Spanish. So so we have introduced a language master in between. I will be covering that in detail. But then basically we introduce a language master to do the translation of the content at that level, and then roll it out to individual countries. Propagation mechanism. Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask. Like, do you all have worked on MSM, right? I assume everyone have some background of MSM. So multi-site manager is one of the very attractive feature that's available in the product. I think you probably have worked on different content management system, right? I like the MSM. It was one of the cool features. I think that's why AEM is sold. AEM is in so demand. So we were clear that we want to use multi-site manager, and the language manager is also an option. But when we design the system, we want to make sure that our business should be able to use both the options. Depends on how they want it. But so far we have used only MSM, but the folder structure that we created is supporting language manager as well, or language copy. Then the translation aspect, Shakeela kind of covered. We already have a translation system, which is a human translation, and then there's a machine translation, and also there's a hybrid. MTP stands for machine translation post edit. After the machine translation, there's a human addition on the content. So we support all three. Integration mechanism. When we started, we used to talk to a lot of translation services like Clay Tablet, and then there was a lot of standard connectors available. And other choice for us is to implement our own custom. And the reason we went with custom, because our human translation and as well as the machine translation, they are not out of box, off-the-shelf translation product. Cisco manages that, so Cisco has built a wrapper around those translation systems. So even if you get a connector, the connector needs to be modified to make it work with the system. So then why spend money on getting a off-the-shelf connector, rather we build our own custom integration. Then the source is like, since you're going with multi-site manager, the source is basically we go with the blueprint live copy model. And the last one is one of the key thing, rollout trigger, right? So as Shakeela mentioned, we have two different requirements. One is where a content will be propagated based on a manual, a human basically go and trigger a rollout or trigger a propagation, or the other is auto, like any change happen on the blueprint should automatically replicate the contents onto the live copies. So we support both. So I will be covering, that is like, I want to kind of focus on that because that's something that we have built as a core of our globalization solution. Let me know if any question, if you have any question anytime. So this is a site structure. Yeah, sorry.
Excuse me. So when you mentioned that you're multi-tenant, right?
Mm.
So is it right to assume that every tenant of yours has the exact same set of functionalities, or do you let's say marketing wants the publish button to look differently, and your HR department wants something else?
Yes.
Publish to do something else entirely.
No, so it's actually the capabilities that we build is available for all of them, but it's up to the business to choose what they want. They can actually choose to go with a manual rollout, and some business can say that, oh, I don't want to do any manual work, everything should be automated, so they can actually use that.
So the base blueprint ENUS that you say is common across all your stakeholders?
Yes, that will be common.
All tenants?
Yes, in all tenants. It's the rollout configuration that you set on those folders will be different.
Okay.
Which I will be covering in the set. Yeah, so, one more.
Just quick, what was the version of AEM we're talking about?
So, yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think that I mentioned, right, we started with 5.5.
Okay.
So that's why I mentioned that some of the features that we built, some of the, I feel like they are available in the latest version, like some of this machine translation integration. But when we started with 5.5, it was not available.
So currently you're on?
No, currently we are on 6.0
Okay.
SP2. So this is the site structure I kind of mentioned. ENUS is our source, US English, and then we kind of move that into an international English, which is a live copy. So international English is a live copy of US English. Then from international English, it actually goes to the different countries. And for any languages that are kind of available in multiple countries, if you see Portuguese, Spanish, then we create a separate layer or another level of live copy and which we call language master. And then the content will be moved from the language master to the individual countries. Like, for Portuguese, it goes to PTPT's Portuguese, and the other one is Brazil Portuguese. So let's continue.
I have a question. So, did you run into any scenarios where, in my experience, sometimes like ENUK would like to be the source for, European countries?
We did. So I think it was not represented here properly. So for Spanish, we used to have a regional site, but for Spanish, we are actually going with individual country site in this model. So we have to make one of them as the main site. So ESMX, or the Mexico, Spanish is the root or basically the blueprint for rest of the Spanish countries like Argentina, Peru, all those countries.
Okay.
So we have, I think not for in UK, only for Spanish, the Spanish, Latin American countries we have that.
And is there any particular reason why you have a US English and an ENUS?
The reason is like
at a different level altogether?
Yeah, so the reason is, for Cisco.com, the primary content gets created in ENUS, and that is more US specific. But when they move the content or when they push the content to, let's say, European countries, they don't want to keep the ENUS specific content, right? So that's what they want to kind of internationalize the content, like, make it ready for a global content. So they can make the change at the...
Do you localize that in the international English?
Some of them, not everything. Okay. Yeah, the business, so we created it to provide that capability. So now it's the authors to go and modify the content if they want.
Hello, I got one.
Yeah.
So the TMS from ENUS, when you use the translation engine to get the Portuguese master, right? How do you manage the delta, Brazilian Portuguese? Do you, I don't think so.
Oh, they have the same content.
They're the same content, but there is some delta between Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, right? The version of these two.
No. So when you do the translation of the Portuguese, right? Then the same content will be put to Brazil Portuguese and the Portugal Portuguese. It's up to the author. They can say that I don't want to publish the content to Portugal Portuguese, but only to Brazil Portuguese. They can. It all depends on that particular file.
So are you saying both the locale have the same,
The content, yeah. Most of the time it's the same content.
In my experience, for example, Chinese have 3 versions, right?
Mm.
There are some of the words which changes. So that is, the TMS will not give you that
No.
variation. So there's some delta there, right?
No. So that the user will go directly edit there.
So that's a human intervention.
Human, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yes, I'm just curious.
So let's continue. So basically what we did, from solution approach, we already know what's the requirement. We know we want to use the MSM. So first thing was clear, you want to go with MSM as our solution. And the second thing is we looked at the rollout configuration. You all know what is rollout configuration, right? Basically the product provides an extension mechanism for you to create your own action when a rollout happens or when someone triggers a rollout from a blueprint to a copy. So we looked at the default rollout configurations. None of them will work for us. So we have to actually introduce our own custom rollout configuration and with custom action. Then for all the page framework elements, we use data dictionary. Again, I assume you know what is data dictionary. It's again if you are coming from a Java background, it's similar to resource bundle. Where you can define the key and translated values. The fourth one is one of the key implementations that we have done. It's kind of little different. I don't know if anyone has actually done that. We introduced a scheduled job for auto rollout, which I will be kind of covering that in detail. So we want to do a controlled rollout, right? So if you go with the requirement, I think I'll wait for it. I'll actually cover that in a separate slide. Then we create all the translation integration as an OSGA service so that it can be called from any part or any of the anywhere in the web, any application. Let's focus on the manual rollout configuration. So if you see the 4 columns, you can see that there's the first one is ENUS, then EN International, then FR International, which is our language master, and then FR which is our country site. Now before giving the content to authors, we actually create a top level folders. Basically IT does that. And for products, the products is the marketing site area and they want everything to be manual. So what you do is, you know that your blueprint, ENUS your source, then you create a rollout configuration. Basically that's the green thing that you see is a rollout configuration, which has a rollout action of the rollout action essentially has copy content, which is the standard rollout, right? When you move the content, you want to kind of copy the content, update, delete orders, order children, that's a standard Adobe one. And the triggering point is on rollout. On rollout means someone has to go and manually, trigger the rollout. And for FRINTL, again, the rollout action is copy content, which is the standard, and then there's the translation workflow. So we invoke a translation workflow for a human translation. This is a human translation rollout configuration. And then for FRFR, again, copy content, and then there's a custom reference update. There's a reference update action in AEM. So we cannot use that. I'll come to that. So we introduce a custom reference update. So now what happens? This is the initial setup that we create in the system, and then the author, let's say Mary comes, she's the one who is actually editing the content. So she created a content in ENUS. Then later Sarah comes, she do a rollout on the ENUS content, which will trigger a rollout on the rollout to ENINTL. And then later Joe comes, he does a rollout on ENINTL, again trigger a rollout to FRINTL, and Nicole comes later, then do a rollout of FRINTL to FRFR. So this is what typically happens from a manual rollout. Every step has to be done by a human to trigger the rollout. And the translation workflow, I will spend some time on the translation workflow. So the human translation, how it works is, you send a content for translation, and it actually it's not a real-time translation, right? You send it to them, it will take 2 or 3 weeks to for the human to do a translation, and then it comes back, right? So the translation workflow essentially, the first step of the translation workflow is to read the translatable contents. In the page, we have a way to identify which all are the contents, which all are the translatable contents, and that's based on the X type. Then we pick that, we send them as a JSON or XML to the service, and the service will give a job ID. Again, this is a Cisco on service, so they've exposed a web service for that. And then we retrieve the job ID, and then we save the job ID into the workflow, and then the workflow go into a pending state or a sleep state. There is no activity on that workflow. Then after 2-3 weeks, when the translation is ready, they will call a service back to us. We expose a service for them. So they call us saying that this job ID is done. And then we continue with the workflow, which will make another call to get the content, and then content will be updated on the in the source. So this is how the manual rollout work. And also why the custom reference update is like, as I mentioned earlier, we are doing a selective page, right? And if you know the out-of-box reference update, all it does is like blindly replace the link to the local specific one. So in our case, that doesn't work, because since you are doing a selective one, the blind replacement doesn't work. So we had put some more intelligence to it, and we essentially check the existence of the page on that on the country site, and if it is there, then we will replace the link. Otherwise, we'll point back to the ENUS. Yes.
What percentage of content is translated by human versus machine or through memory?
So most of our marketing content is translated through human. They don't want, because marketing is very particular about the content quality, right?
No market.
So they want to make sure that everything goes through the content, and the entire support side, not the technical documentation, but the support side uses machine translation. From a percentage wise, I don't know if Chris is here. Yeah, but then for a high level, we have that separation based on the site area. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, so I guess you mentioned it takes 2 weeks, and you get all these levels. So I'm assuming the content updates are still happening. That the page got locked in the parent when it's going through this rollout process. Like, how do you control that?
So we actually leave it to the author. So if the they know that because let's say that content is translated, right? So since we are using MSM, the content will be already replaced with English. Then the author who's actually editing the content, so when we create it, we create a version. So when we replace the English, we always create a version. So they can, if they want to actually publish the content, they can go to the previous version and then publish that, if at all, if they have to make any changes.
Okay, but if there were changes in the source while something was out for translation, how do you mitigate that? Or does
that they have to go and do a.
I don't think you can do much about it. Basically, it's get bundled and goes to TMS. I'm sorry to interrupt. It gets bundled up and go to a TMS, and that gets translated. Ideally, I was curious about the translation workflow, and I'll help. Please help me to understand a little bit more how Cisco works. But in my experience, so how it works is especially in Clear Tablet, right? You have a status there. It gives you, when you submit a job to get translation done, it gives you a status and it tells you actually what timeline and how much the port will be.
Correct.
Now at Cisco, do you have the timeline getting when you submit a job? Because you need to understand how many word count it is, how much time basically it is going to take, and give you a status.
Correct. So we don't really look at so they have sent us the time, like it will take this much time. And I think the costing part they will send directly to the the order through a separate workflow within the translation system. But we don't really look at the timing part, because we don't want to kind of keep polling the translation system to check if the translation is ready, right? Rather, we actually build a service and ask them to call us or let us know when the translation is ready.
Right, yeah, basically when you want to launch that pages or publish those pages, you have to have an ETA, because business wants to know when.
So that part, it's kind of outside the WEM system. It's actually directly with the translation within the translation system. So the business who is creating the translation, they will actually get a notification from the translation system.
So that's not a world server connector which you guys are using, right?
This is a world server.
Is world server connector? The connector is custom?
No, connector is custom. It's a custom web service, yeah. So the translation system, the human translation system, is a web server. I will be connecting that I will be covering that in one of the subsequent slides.
Yeah, thank you.
Question, is that
Yes.
custom reference update workflow?
No,
Sort
it's-
resource intensive, like to actually check the repository for every link on the page, is it, or is it, you don't have performance issues with that?
No, that's fine for
It's okay?
us, yeah. We are okay with that so far. And let's look at the auto rollout. So again, you know, the same structure, you have 4 different levels, and I know I'm referring support as this time the folder. So this is how the you know, the initial rollout configuration will be from EN/US to EN/INTL. You have a on activate, you know, the triggering point is on activate, and then the rollout action is again copy content, which is the default one, and focus on the second point, which is create a rollout audit node. That's the next action that it has. All it does is like it just create an audit node saying that this node is rolled out. And then, you know, from EN/INTL to FR/NTL, if you actually look at the requirement, what they want is whenever an activation happens on EN/US, it should propagate into all the sites, right? And if you have to implement that from an out-of-box, what you do is you basically, you know, from EN/INTL to FR/INTL, use on modify as your triggering point, right? So when something changes on EN/INTL, it should automatically do a rollout onto the other countries. And that will be a big problem for us, right? Because we don't want, if someone is actually doing an activation of a root level folder, then, and if it has like, let's say, thousands of pages, then it, you know, it's going to be a chain reaction in our system, and which will bring down the system. So we don't want to do that. So what we did is like we changed the rollout triggering point as on rollout, which means a manual. Someone has to go and manually trigger the rollout. And for each level, you know, if you have like 4 levels or 5 levels, everything is actually a on rollout triggering point. And if you look at the rollout actions, again the rollout actions are same. All it has is like copy content and create audit rollout node. Then let's see how it actually works. You know, Mary, again, activate the content. On activation, the first thing is like on activation, the raw content gets rolled out to EN/INTL, and it stops there. You know, there's no more rollout happening, right? Now we have created a scheduled job, a background job, which comes and all it does is like it reads that audit node and then start processing. And what are the different steps that it goes through? One is it translates the content. It then after translation, it requests the rendition and it requests the link replacement, the same custom reference update, whatever that happens. We have a link replacement functionality, and then it activates the content if an activation is required. And finally, the 5th step is actually calling a rollout API or calling a rollout function on that node, which is kind of similar to a manual rollout, right? So which will trigger the rollout from EN/INTL to FR/INTL at that level. And this process kind of continue, you know, until all the nodes are processed. So this is how we kind of achieve the auto rollout functionality without compromising on the system performance. Yes.
So the link replacement, do you have some sort of lookup table that says if I'm on this site, I want to replace my links if the page doesn't exist with something else, or does it always just fall back to English?
No, we have. So it's like, you know, the link replacement is not happening at all the levels. It doesn't make sense, right? The link replacement will happen only at the final website. And from when you're on the final, so if you see the FR/INTL and EN/INTL, they're not available on the published instance. It's all internal representation. So when you're on FR/FR, the link replacement always fall back to EN/US. But when you're on, let's say, ES Argentina, your link replacement fall back to ES Mexico, and if it's not available in ES Mexico, it will fall back to EN/US.
So you have some sort of
Correct.
global fallback
Correct.
mapping.
Yes, and also the link replacement, we have, you know, the business or another requirement where sometimes we have links to external applications or external sites, and you know, that's not there in our repository, right? So we can actually do a lookup. So we have a mapping table or a mapping configuration which says that whenever you find this URL in this locale, you need to replace that with that locale. So we have that also as part of the link replacement. And again, the translate content request rendition, again, that will be invoked based on which level you are in. So there we have configuration or control for that.
A couple of questions in my head. So what is the rendition? Is that
So the
a
rendition
render?
is like, you publish, assume that your source is a Word file, or simply take a source is an HTML file, right? And when you publish an HTML file, you want to have a PDF version of it, a MOBI version of it, the different types of file, right? So the rendition system, if you feed in an HTML file, it will give you back the PDF, MOBI, and other renditions of the same file. So that's the request rendition. So if you go to, if you're familiar with Cisco.com, if you go to any of the pages, like the document, like the end of the document, you can see a PDF version at the, attached to it. So that's how we generate that.
And the second question I had was the digital assets.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with them in terms of they all just point to the same, or is there
No,
any
so digital assets is like, since MSM is not supported on the DAM area, we we let this content authors to kind of copy them manually. Yeah, so they have, we kind of created a similar structure for DAM as well. Only thing is like the MSM is not available, so we kind of ask them to copy it. So once the content is available on the DAM area, it will automatically refer to that. So the rollout process, when they do the link replacement, right, it will check in the DAM area of that appropriate location.
I see. Okay, so that's also convention-based. Same.
Correct, yeah.
Just a quick question along the same lines. What about campaigns or personalization? Have you guys done anything in that area?
No, not from this one. So, Chris, do you know we haven't used the campaign or personalized content in this globalization, right?
We have, but in a limited fashion. It's pretty manual.
Yep. I figured we can. Okay.
Cool. So, I think one of these, like the next slide, I'm going to kind of give you. This is more of the audit node representation for the auto rollout. Again, I just did some last minute editing, so the text may not be good. So the first one is like, the first state of the audit node is like audit node created, which is done by the MSM rollout, right? When you do an MSM rollout, the specific action that I've shown will be creating the audit node. And then comes the translation processor. I will actually talk about why they are four different. So the translation processor essentially reads that node and then requests a translation, and once the translation is done, it actually sets the appropriate status, like S33. S1, S2, S3 is like symbolic. When in our system we have different one. And then comes the rendition processor. Again, rendition processor reads all the nodes whose state is S3 and start processing, like request rendition, and once the rendition done, it will set the status as S5. Then comes the rollout processor, which will read all the audit nodes whose status is S5, and then trigger a rollout. Essentially rollout manager dot rollout, right? That's API. And then activation processor comes and it actually reads the S6 or S5, depends on the state, and then do an activation. And then finally, it set the status as audit processing done so that it can be cleaned up. Now, I showed you a schedule job in the previous slide, but now if you see here, we have like 4 different schedule jobs. And the reason why we have we kind of separated that into 4 different, so that the operations can independently manage the processing. So let's take an example, right? Take the same example of an auto rollout of 1,000 pages. It is going to actually, go into the activation queue. And we used to have a lot of problems with the activation queue. So assume that this process is happening at the same time someone wants to publish a priority file. So their file is going to be stuck in the activation queue if this is processing, right? So operations can just come and stop that job, activation job alone, so that it will not block the activation queue, but the rest of the rollout process will happen. And when they enable back, it starts doing the activation. And from a auto rollout, what we said is that you will not get a priority publishing. You always get a whatever that process it takes, right? It will be a delayed publishing, and they were okay with that. So that's how we kind of implemented the auto rollout. Any question?
So when you say
this whole thing
Sorry.
take?
It kind of probably like 10 to 15 minutes, because one of the main time taking is the rendition part. And again, depends on how many nodes are coming. And we have all throttling enabled for this thing, right? We have a translation system has a limit of 25 at a time. So we when that processor comes, it reads only the whatever that configured limit, like 25 or 10 or
So
whatever.
it varies then.
It varies, yeah.
So these are OSDI scheduled jobs, or they are
Yes.
external things calling?
Yes, this is the OSG schedule jobs. We can, if you want, because we always worried about the performance, right? So for now, it is an OSG schedule job, but if you want to, make it to a separate, run it to a separate JVM, that's possible.
Sorry, just curious. So when you say there's a translation processor working independently of, let's say, the rollout processor, right? So is he just responsible for starting the translation workflow and sending the content over to the TSM,
Yes.
or that's it?
That's it.
Okay.
But the rollout processor, even though I kind of showed it here, the rollout processor has a bigger role. As I mentioned, like some of the node doesn't require a translation, right? So the rollout processor simply moves from S1 to S6. So
Okay.
the translation process, all it does is like just read the nodes that are ready for translation and then push it to the translation.
And doesn't your rendition processor require the content that has been imported after translation?
Yes. Yes.
So it
Yeah.
the timeline may change.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. It's always in that sequence. The rendition processor always read a node which is whose status is S3, which is like translation time. So I want to kind of quickly talk about the translation system. As I mentioned, like GSSO is our human translation system, which is based on the STL World Server, and they provide a web service for us to integrate with them, and they take XML and JSON as the payload, and the translation workflow I kind of covered. And whereas in AltSEO, which is again our Cisco managed machine translation system based on Sistran and ProMT, again, same web services called by web services, and we created them as an OSGI service, and payload is XML JSON, and the same system is used for machine translation post-edit.
Any specific reason of not using STL's world server's machine translation services?
Because, as I mentioned, it's a Cisco managed, so Cisco kind of bought the STL server and then built on top of it.
Oh.
So, they don't really take the default APIs.
Okay.
And other consideration, I think I touched upon the custom link replacement, MTP is kind of done. The export import with live copy, the other things that business wanted is, instead of doing a rollout through MSM, they want to export the content and then do an offline translation and then import it back. At the time of importing, they want it to be the live copy. So, we have built that capability. And the data-driven components and fallback, like in Cisco.com, by default, AEM uses the folder as the navigation, right? So in Cisco.com, our hierarchy or navigation is based on the product's hierarchy. So we have built a lot of custom components for building that, and with this globalization, one of the challenges was to kind of make sure that all those components needs to have the appropriate fallback rule. And with that, I think we are done with the presentation.
Do you have any metrics on how load testing,
Yes.
how it works? Like, when you have active versus one site being live, I'm pretty sure when you roll
Yeah,
out,
we capture that, we do that. It's not here, but we do that. If you want, we can actually share that offline. Yeah, but we capture those numbers.
Do you do like snapshots, like when you roll out changes,
Yes.
you do load testing?
Yes, we have our load testing team has a set of scenarios captured, and auto rollout is one of the scenarios that we use.
Have you noticed any spikes in any particular scenario?
Not necessarily from a specific action, but then once in a while we see different changes, but not
When you roll out?
but not necessarily. That could be because of some external factors, but otherwise the auto
Not because
rollout.
of the-
Yeah, again, as I mentioned, it's a controlled rollout. We are not kind of rolling out the entire site into those 60 countries, right? It's more of a control. So because of the throttling, the load is always going to be the same throughout the system.
I was I was a bit late. So, is this system in production? Or are you
Yes,
planning?
it's in production,
So when you
and both the human translation or the manual rollout and auto rollout is mostly done. So when everything is kind of done, it's going to be half of the site is already live. Some of them are still going to be live by February, March.
Okay, and when you say that the other half is with Q5, or what's the CQ5, or what is?
No, everything is on same instance, single instance, which is now AEM 6.0. Yeah, so there is, yeah.
Sorry, not quite a technical question, but more around process. With the number of authors that you have, how do you manage training and getting them set up and access to the systems and all that kind of
I'll
stuff?
probably let Chris answer that.
I mean, we use Jive to host a lot of online training. A lot of times we have like WebEx recordings to kind of let them see how to do something, but we train like some key stakeholders throughout the globe, and then we adopt more of a train the trainer kind of model.
And how often do they screw stuff up?
Every week. Yeah, but our publishing team has like weekly Q&As and things like that.
I have a question about activation queue, which you mentioned. And I understand Cisco have millions of pages, right? But in a small application, is that an issue? I mean, suppose I were to publish, I don't know, 500 pages. If I publish it all at the same time, is that a concern in AEM? Because
we used to have a lot of problems,
Right.
but I believe, you guys, I don't know, maybe you can give a
We had
feedback.
problems in the past.
Yeah.
If you try to publish the entire node hierarchy with the translation, it just was.
Where does it stop? Do you know how many number of pages? I'm not doing any custom, for example.
Not really the numbers, but at least like after like 100 pages, if you receive back, we use translations.com. We never receive back more than like, not even 100, like more than 50 pages. It just to get stuck after that. So it will just take a while to get out and then start running again.
So you guys using TDC? So you have a TDC connector or? How
It was like another project I was doing.
Oh.
Like the translate out of the box, we used out of the box itself. We had to do a custom translation. We had to do some version changes on that one to make it work for our client.
So I had another question. So you mentioned at one point that you guys create versions and
Yes.
things like that. So how do you manage that? As people are using, rollouts are happening. Do you trim your versioning, or does that keep growing?
We actually do a version purge, and also we are actually introducing, because for Cisco.com, I don't know, maybe all the companies have that rule. So we have a legal requirement to keep the content once you're supposed to publish it. We want to kind of keep the content for any legal purpose. So we are building an archival solution where we, basically take the previous version and then push it there, so that we keep only 5 versions of a content at a given point of time.
And then when you were showing the diagram earlier, with your inheritance hierarchy, the bottom ones are the ones that are sites, so like the middle tiers are invisible to the public.
Correct. It will be only in author.
Okay.
It won't even go to the publish instance. The language masters,
Right.
they will be only in author.
But is it also visible to authors, like the middle tiers?
Oh, yeah.
The translation ones?
Yes.
Why,
Because
why do you make it visible?
Because they like, let's take an example, right? If they do a translation of a content, and if they want to do a human translation on top of that content, they can actually do it at that language master level. Yeah.
Yeah, how big is your repository? I mean, the number of pages and data.
So I think we have around 1 million pages.
No, I mean the size of the repository, like in
The
terabytes. What is this?
1 petabyte?
Yeah, I think, Murli, do you know the number on?
Actually, it's 6. 3 terabytes. Yeah, 80.
How big is your author? The size of the author? Like how many GB RAM you're using?
We are on bare metal.
Bare metal.
64, 128?
It's a 64.
And how many concurrent users do you have? Like
I think we have around.
Last statistics, and this keeps on changing because we are migrating from our legacy system. Plus, like I said, we have multi-tenancy architecture, so we are adding more websites to the thing, right? Last time I checked, the total number of users were about 4,000 plus authors, but concurrent users at any point of time, the max were around 120 to 150 range. See, a lot of our support authors, they actually do authoring in a different, they do it in FrameMaker or XSmart or Oxygen or something like that, because most of the support docs are end-of-day documents. And we are actually storing that in Alfresco, and we are just using AEM to publish those. So a lot of our, this is low number, you can say 4,000 people and only 120 concurrent users, right? First and foremost, the authoring community is spread across the globe, right? That's number one. Number two is, like Anil mentioned, the support content is authored in XMart or FrameMaker, other solutions, because they need XML authoring, the technical documentation. And then once they author, the documentation flows through AEM. So authoring is, basically author is a bypassing mechanism to go to Cisco.com, right? So a lot of authoring happens, support authoring happens on the other end. So that is why about 120 to 150 concurrent users plus 4,000 total.
And you said how many author instances you have?
We have one.
So
One.
you do results recovery for that?
We are going towards 3.
Correct.
In another 2-3 months, what we do is there's a project going, which Murli is leading, is content, we call as content sharding. So we are trying to put pre-sales content in one, post-sales content into one, and then there are all the realms, we talked about other tenants, right, into the third instance, so that we will separate the authoring and the content and ease out the contention.
So right now our biggest challenge is because of the size of our repository and the activity that happens on the instance. Our compaction takes a long time. Sometimes it takes more than 8 or 10 hours. So our author is down for some time. And so, trying to get downtime every week is not possible. So you postpone. But if you postpone, then it's going to take even longer because there's more activity happening. So it's always, and that's one of the main drivers to moving to 6.3, because Adobe tells us that 6.3 they are going to provide online compaction. You won't have to bring the author down.
It doesn't work in 6.0.
Yeah.
We also have manual.
That's the biggest, like I said, for every weekend, it's down for 5 hours. It's a chicken and egg problem, right? You don't do it, it slows down. You do it, you have to take it down, right? So the only solution is move to 6.3 and then, instead of one author, distribute it into 3 authors. So that we separate out. So the content size is small, and then, the compaction time, the downtime also goes down.
So have you looked into cold standby setup?
So we tried out actually, but we are having some challenges and we tried out.
So there is actually no strategy. If the current author goes down,
There's only one
bring it
author.
back down. Then
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah,
because
it's a single point of failure right now,
Yeah.
and that's the biggest challenge. That's why we are trying to separate out so that at least the impact is less. Let's say one author goes on, at least the other 2 authors are up, and it doesn't impact the entire community, right? It's that's one, but hopefully 6.3 is that's good.
So you're going in 6.3, or you're going to skip 6.2 altogether?
Yes, we are going to skip it because 6.2 doesn't offer us, because this is our biggest challenge, and 6.2 doesn't offer the solution. So there is no point going to 6.2. Now we are going to skip that and go directly to 6.2.
So at least for now, this can tell us otherwise, but our business is not really asking us for touch UI or features.
Are there any AEM specific challenges with post standard? Or is it something to do with the network setup? What?
So basically, we are getting sometimes primary artists are responding. So that is the challenge that we use. So that's the reason actually
We actually turned it off.
we turned it off.
It was on, but the main order system will just go irresponsive, just hung in there.
Yeah,
So
so
we have to take it out, and the incidents were at least once in a week kind of a thing. So ultimately we switched it off.
So just to add to that, so we use 6.1 and we implement cold standby.
Okay.
We have 1 primary and 3 standby. It works fine.
It works.
I mean,
Maybe
primary is
version
talking to the
that we are,
standards.
because of the version that we are on, right? So this is like 6.0, right? So they might have done some enhancement or something. But what is the service pack that you are on?
Service pack 2.
We are also on service pack 2, but 6.0. Yeah, maybe that's the challenge.
It means there are some information.
Yeah, in 6. So that's the reason actually we are participating in beta for 6.3 to see how it works and all that stuff. I'm curious, did you go to 6.0 and then 6.1?
No, we went from 5.6 to 6.1.
Yeah, we moved from 5.5 to 6.0, and we I mean, it's like a nightmare. I mean, the experience is really bad. So I need a long time to, move on to the 6.0. But 5.5 to 5.6 is okay. From 5.6 to any 6.4, 6.1, the journey is smooth. But we got like a lot of hurdles.
Is anyone participating in the 6.3 beta? So what are you guys, what is your strategy? When
Well,
you
we,
say-
no, we have, I mean, we're just like signed up, we actually haven't started actively doing it yet. We just were asked like last week.
What are you on now?
6.1, 6.2. We did the 5.6.1 to 6.1, but we're looking to just jump to 6.3. I work at Intel.
So you're planning to do the 6.3, right? Not waiting for service pack or anything for that?
Well, if that's why we want to participate in beta. So we are ready, I don't know whether Adobe will follow up on that promise or not, but what they have told us is if we participate and if they see any problems in our installation in testing, that they will fix those problems before the GA generally available.
Right.
So that's one of the big motivation for us to participate, so that we test it out right now. And if the problem is in front of Adobe, they fix it before the version is available. That gives us some peace of mind, right? So that and then we really don't need to wait for. Typically, Cisco doesn't. Our policy has been that unless until there is at least one service pack, we don't upgrade.
Exactly.
Right? But if we participate in beta and Adobe works with us, then I think that concern goes down slightly.
So, is there any plan to convert your components to slightly touch UI before going to 6.3?
That's a big, I would say that's one of the big
Because they are
unknowns
support,
in the thing. One of the things we are trying to find out is when Adobe says that we are not going to support classic UI, right? What does that mean? Is it that all the components that we have will stop working? And I've not been able to get a very clear answer from them. What does that mean, and what is the effort on my part, and what do I have to do?
They won't release any fixes for classic.
Fixes, correct, yeah. So I think we'll be okay. If at least the current components work, and then over time we will start to change them. But at least we need some assurance from Adobe that the existing components will work, right? That they are not going to fail. Even if that is there, I think we'll be okay to upgrade the system.
You may have to pay more to get that classic UI fixes. There's something in their support.
I don't know whether you guys have tried this, but Adobe is telling me they have a professional services engagement where they can come and assess your installation and give you a recommendation of what all needs to happen if you are trying to go to 6.0. We have not gone that route yet, but at some point of time we may consider using their professional services and doing an assessment.
We did a top-down professional services review. We had to go for another round to get more.
Good to know.
It's a professional service, like ongoing thing.
So when we interacting with the Adobe product owners, actually they are saying that they have a utility which will convert the dialog boxes into the touch UI compliant.
Not
So
yet,
that in your
not yet.
brand-
We are using it.
It doesn't work.
Like the customized components, you have to go back and fix that.
Yeah, you saw it.
Yeah,
Cherry
doesn't
component.
work. That too doesn't work. Yeah, so when we are talking to the secretary, he was saying that we do have a utility, we can use it.
So because we have 700 components, right?
Yeah,
imagine
it's
the
growing
GAU.
every day.
I think we have to do some cleanup.
Yeah, that's one of the things, with this multi-tenancy, what has happened is, there are so many tenants on the system, right? And every tenant is adding, at some point of time, we will have to, what I call as a refactoring program, right? Where we have to go and consolidate. An ideal situation would be, there is 3 sets of, two libraries there, right? One is what is provided by Adobe out of the box. Second is Cisco developed. And, I would say, I actually want to get to a situation where very rarely I would like to develop a new component. So any tenant comes in and says use the library there. If it's not there, then add to the library, right? Once in a while, but that should be right now. What every project that comes in, first thing is another 10 components and 2 frameworks, and it's just templates.
I'm kind of smiling because I say the same thing, but every sprint we're creating new components. How many developers do you guys have to build out components and stuff?
This is, maybe, it's, so we wanted this activity to be also done by the business, why the whole IT needs to do it, right? So we have situations where, we have a group, a separate group, IT team that develops the components on demand from customer. But we also have, where our marketing business stakeholders, they develop their own components too. And then there is Cisco Commerce Workspace, which is a selling platform, right? They are also on the same platform. They do their own development. So we have where some of the tenants do their own development, and then we provide development for certain tenants. But Cisco.com, it's a centralized group. So it's a combination, and that is where it's just starting, like Prem was saying, it's just starting to grow too much now. At some point of time, we need to go and clean out that.
You mentioned commerce. Is there any integration with commerce, like checkout and stuff like that?
Right now, the only thing we have is product catalogs on web. So when you go in, you can browse the catalogs. That functionality is on web. The actual ordering and everything is still a separate application.
So that is something that we have on our roadmap, because now Cisco, especially for the commercial segment, we want to basically offer buying capability from .com itself, so that you don't have to go to it. But for our enterprise and service provider products, they involve very complex configuration, and there's a lot of pricing, discounting, promos and stuff, and the sales cycles are very long. So that is handled in Cisco Commerce Workspace, which is a separate tool.
Which is the solution, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Which e-com solution you guys are working with? I mean, is it VR or Elastic Path?
Homegrown software.
I think
Yeah, we're not figured. I mean, there's the commerce team is actually working with Digital River and Magento and some of these sites to do some what we call as low value, high volume transactions. But we are looking at how to bring that into Cisco.com and how to actually put a buy button on Cisco.com itself, where people can actually buy. There's also the capability that business wants to offer, like you see on some of the consumer sites where you can compare different models, if you will. That kind of capability is also on their wish list. So these are things that are being discussed, but we don't have any solution yet. We want actually implemented those things.
Eldho, I was curious about one thing. I wanted to understand what is your content QA process. If you have any, what I meant by that is once you get the translation back, those localized content, how does it, I'm assuming it sits in folder structure there and then gets populated in those pages. Do you have a mechanism where, either language ambassadors or somebody goes through that?
So for, as I mentioned, the support, they have limited bandwidth of content authors, so they don't really do a lot of validation. But for marketing, they are very particular about the content quality, so they have team dedicated to who does the translation, validation and all. So it's kind of pretty extensive process. Yes.
I'd like to go back 2 steps. So when we said there were 120 concurrent authors, right? I think he mentioned about certain authors just working with other systems and having some kind of an integration where only the it's more automated and less of actual component authoring experience, right? So how many, what kind of concurrent users do you have who actually need to create a new page, add components and update content on a regular basis?
The 120 he mentioned is for the WEM system, which is our AEM system, and they are the one who's creating the pages and other things. So there is a different set of authors who is working on a different system, which is Alfresco based. They are the one who creates the product documentation and things like that on that system. So 120 is the concurrent authors on this particular AEM platform.
Okay.
120 plus web services that are coming on.
Okay. I was just curious because we've seen a lot of Adobe recommendations saying, let's say 40 per author. That is the usual number I have seen. So it's like 120 seems.
No, so we again we have a lot of problems. As I mentioned, the author instance has a lot of problems. and over a period of time, it kind of getting stabilized. So I think for the last few.
Yeah, initially we are in the VM, but we migrated to
bare metal.
Bare
So one of the driving force to go to bare metal was this, that the content creators were growing, and we were not able to keep up with the demand, right? Because the offer was slowing down tremendously, right? So we went from VM to bare metal.
That's what we are actually,
helped a lot.
we are working on separating the author instance based on the site area so that we can distribute the authors into different author instances.
So did you guys, back when 6.1 came in, did you guys investigate the possibility of using multiple authors with a MongoDB or something like that?
We did some evaluation, but then we didn't make any change as such.
Yeah, MongoDB, we considered it, but again, Adobe's recommendation itself was that don't go to Mongo.
Okay.
So they, it was, and we talked to Adobe.com folks, the folks who run Adobe.com all the time, and they are telling us don't go to MongoDB, stay with tar.
Okay, so this is even before 6.3 beta came in.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is
okay.
like, this is as late as I would say when we were going to 6.0 and 6.1, right? Considering that, and that is the one when they told us don't go to MongoDB.
Did they give you a reason why?
Huh?
Did they give you a reason why?
Well, they said tar is the, if you are looking for speed, tar is the best implementation as far as they are concerned. MongoDB is, if you start to go to truly what they call as not multi-tenancy, but if you have multiple instances of
depending on who you talk to in Adobe, you will get slightly different answers. Yeah, and their official line is that if you want a highly distributed system, but the performance per node may not be as great, then Mongo is the right way to go.
Exactly.
But if you want the high performance, then tar is the way to go for better performance. Although if you go by their, what they actually have documented, they've presented at, certain industry forums and all. And in their presentations, I'm talking about Apache, not Adobe Summit per se, Apache Developer Conference and all. There they basically say that anything more than 1 terabyte, right, they suggest that you use Mongo. We fit in that, but still, even there, we had a half-day workshop at Adobe in San Jose, and their chief, product engineer, he came and he told us that no, you should just stick to tar, and we will be fixing the compaction problem in 6.3. So, just stay with tar.
Yeah, but the other thing is that, so we came from this half-day thing, and we said, okay, we'll stay with tar. And then next week, I was talking to Apple, somebody in Apple, the architect there, and they said they have moved on to Mongo because Adobe told them to go to Mongo. One week they tell us stay with that. Next thing, next week we talk to Apple and they're saying, hey, we have moved to MongoDB on Adobe's recommendation. So
I went for a training and half the book was on MongoDB, how to install and everything.
Yeah,
So I thought that's what suggesting for, like you said, distributed systems, especially with different data centers. That's what their suggestion was.
Yeah, I certainly think that they see that the future is there, but I don't think that they have enough, experience with Mongo. And I don't know if you guys have been using Mongo in other areas, not with AEM, but we have other application schemes that are using Mongo. And sharding and things like that can be pretty challenging with Mongo. So we are also trying things. Our commerce platform, we actually ran for more than a month with Mongo and Oracle and syncing the two because we wanted to make sure that it's running properly before we pull everything off of Oracle.
Because Mongo, again, you have to do the high availability of Mongo, and then that sync and that.
Yeah, and it's relatively new technology, so it's not
expensive too.
It's not entirely problem free. So
what we have decided is at least the first priority for us is to go to 6.3, And maybe once we are stable on 6.2, maybe we'll go and revisit the tar versus Mongo kind of debate.
So just a question on this search. Are you using like any search tool like Solar or anything like that on top of the box?
Yeah, we are. So
We use Ativio, right?
yeah. So we have a combination. We use Ativio. We have a search team, and they do search. They provide search capability for
On the author or?
That's on the
on the
publish.
publisher.
That's on the publish.
Sure.
That is the Cisco.com search. Actually, we are not using any for our implementation on the author.
On the author.
Oh, you meant author.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
But are you trying on for that?
That was one of the recommendations for like if you have to use it on local.
Yeah.
And it can also serve for the external use as well, both of them.
We were thinking about external.
Yeah, we were.
but we
Both of
didn't
them
go
is
down that
suggested.
route.
And the other thing that we used for another client was the search and promote, which is like another Adobe product for the external search.
Oh, okay. For us, actually, Adobe is the search provider.
I have a question. So you mentioned the user management in the process of rollout.
Yeah.
Are you guys using out of the box or
Yes.
you have your own?
No, it's all out of box. All user management permissions are all out.
So one of the business needs I had was about priority activation, low and high priority and all that. Is that there?
We
do have a priority publishing queue.
Priority publishing queues. So we can publish it like whenever we need, we can publish through the priority publishing.
Yeah, we don't really kind of make it available to all the authors. Only when there's a critical content that needs to be made available, then they can make an operation request and they do a.
Yeah, that priority queue has to be handled by our ops team. So we make it available only to our ops team. We have considered having multiple queues because we were hearing from some teams that the publishing time was slow and all. But then we went through our logs and our data and we found that activation, nothing was taking more than 3 to 5 minutes for activation. So we then decided against it.
I have a question over the webinar by a member. Like, how are you managing your user information across the 3 published instances?
So in publish, the user is all the end users, right? They're not really the authors. It's our Cisco.com users. So we have all the Cisco.com users are actually registered on the Cisco LDAP system. So we integrate with that LDAP. So the users are not synced between the author and published instances. They're centrally connected to our LDAP repository for the authentication and authorization.
Okay. And another question about the why have one-on-one relationship with the publisher and the dispatcher?
There is no one-on-one relation. I just said it's a 4+4, but they are kind of independent. It's all managed by a round-robin load balancer.
Okay.
So the request will come to any of the web server, and that web server can route the request to any of the published instance. It's there's no one-on-one relationship.
Okay.
How have you dealt with clearing Akamai cache when pages are published?
So we have a API available to talk to Akamai to cache the content, but then we don't generally refresh the cache immediately. We already have like a time to leave, and as the time to leave it happens, the content gets refreshed.
What's the time delay?
So it depends on the file. We have different time to leave values for different files. Most of our pages we have like around a few seconds, a few minutes, and for assets like we have 8 hours, 24 hours. It depends on the type of assets.
And all of your assets are served by AEM. There's no Scene 7 dynamic media
all are
integration.
AEM.
Okay.
I think the video is on Breadcode.
Yes, our videos are not hosted in AEM. Some of them are still in AEM, but they're primarily on a separate service called Breadcode.
Is there any plan to move to cloud?
For the AEM or for the
For the
video?
AEM.
I don't think so. We haven't really
We've
evaluated
not
that
explored
option.
that.
Yeah. But we don't know at this point.
Really hanging by a thread the way it is right now. Remove the cloud, it's a different ball game for this size of the author we have.
Well, not only that, right now our employee content is also on the same platform, and security classification for that doesn't allow us to host it outside Cisco currently.
So your internet is one of the.
Intranet is also one of the tenants on the same platform.
The publishing server is Eldho. That publishing is a different deal than this publishing.
No,
server.
it's the same thing.
It's the same, but we
you know,
control.
the distinction is that you have to be on the Cisco VPN before you can access the website. So we don't allow.
Web server level,
anybody-
you mark the difference.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
kind of.
So it is
restrict
not
our-
externalized, that is something that is a constant debate.
Definitely.
The business wants that employee should be able to access the website from outside, but our information security group is not.
I'm battling the exact same thing and like this same thing. We are actually putting our intranet into the Adobe system now, and we already have our external facing site. So they didn't want it to be even in the same repository just to make sure there's demarcation. Because the other one has to be.
You know, they have given us two conditions. One is they are saying they need to have a web application firewall in place. And second thing they have said is the content needs to be encrypted where it's stored. So those are two preconditions before we can expose outside, and that's we have not been able to do that.
You're not getting a goal.
Good. You want to say any closing comments?
Yeah, so our next meetup is going to be on Feb 22nd. We are looking for space. If any of you have space to host us, please let me know. But thank you so much, Eldho. Thank you, Shakeela, and thank you everyone for coming. And looking forward to seeing you on February.
Can I say one thing? We have Prem Malhotra, who's our director. He is in charge of the entire content services in Cisco. We are the web content group, but he also has rest of the content and storage with him. So Prem, you want to close it?
I think it's great to have such a good group of people who are asking questions at this time of the night. But really fun to kind of share the experiences. And I think a lot of stuff that we have been able to get to is because of that. I think the Intel experience has helped us a lot. There was a time when AEM was like just a hair's breadth away from being thrown out, because there was so much of frustration at the business level to say this is not up at all. But kudos to the team, and of course the team from Adobe stepped in and they kind of had their act together. And all of you, the feedback that we have got has helped us to go to the level we are. And right now, EM is really regarded very well in this organization, but we're making sure it stays like that. Which means all the new stuff that is happening, 6.3, etc. We're trying very hard to make sure the Adobe has their act together. It's not as bad as it was in 6.0 days, where it took us 6 months to 9 months to get into from 5.6 to 6.0. Because there's a kind of expense, it's extremely expensive. You basically put yourself at standstill, and the business is at standstill because upgrade is happening. We can't afford that anymore. But good thing about Adobe is these guys are adding good features in the product all the time. So it is a state-of-the-art product, but I think as a community we have a great opportunity to share the kind of information you shared in this session. And the other stuff that I do, we have unstructured content, other systems like for PDFs and Office content, all that stays in Alfresco-based content management, and also Box. So we use Box for casual content, which sort of is 3 years and gone. The Alfresco-based system is mostly content which is restricted or important engineering content, and stuff that is legal. So which has to be held together for whatever 7 years, 10 years, and so on. And the way this ecosystem works is that when you heard about content being published onto AEM, which is not authored here, that is happening in places like Alfresco, and the other things like there's an XML authoring system for technical documentation based on Astoria, which is a very aging technology, and we are exploring right now whether that can also move to Adobe platform. So our confidence in Adobe is really going up right now, but we are really banking on 6.3 playing the role they are saying it will, which is that incremental compaction happens. Because the only other way to work with Adobe is that you really have tiny authors and you kind of a bank of authors which are sharded so equally well. And unfortunately, in our case, we can't do that for the variety of reasons from the olden days. So thanks for coming over, and love to see you again.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
No, so you know how So we've taken all the automated stuff.
We can find my name.
Oh, yeah, no, I got on the website. Yeah, I was looking for presentation. So we have a.
We call them Cog 1, Cog 2. Yeah, we have balanced it in, and the content doesn't really cross-link to each other too much. And it's only in dynamic ways, and that's that happens a little bit anyway. So it made sense. I mean, it adds it's a complexity. Most of the they don't share, the content is shared on the publisher's we don't see yeah, you know, there's like a core set of content and just like core files that get replicated over like batch shop. But I mean, they're almost like they work in like two different files. Yeah. So that's the only reason it works. Because they're like completely separate.
I called him this week. He said, okay. I spoke to him, I think he saw that mail and he called me like on Sunday. But he couldn't, I think he couldn't get it registered or something.
We'll see. I mean, you're supposed to be able to cluster them. And it doesn't really scale.
To stop this.
Semantics going to be for our panel in March.
Oh, nice. That's amazing.
They're talking about